If you have your Bibles open, I encourage you to have a look at Genesis chapter 12. And just if you are with us for the first time this morning, I'd like to mention is that we are in the middle of a series called My Story. And I found this quite exciting working through it myself, thinking of my own life and how my story would account in my relationship with God. For the past 2 weeks, we spoke about a lot of things. And maybe this morning you are saying is that, the decisions that I've made in 2026 is a decision that I would absolutely not regret. Every one of us has a story. We have stories of people that we've met, friends that we've spent time with, guys that we've played soccer or did some athletics with. Maybe a relationship that worked well, and then maybe a relationship that didn't work well. A habit that you started and stopped. But all those kind of things are part of our story. And maybe today you also at a story where you are going to make a conscious choice regarding to not allow anything that has been hobbling you in your walk with God to try to get over some hurt that has been hounding you for such a long time. But I want you to know the following, is that several years from now, if you make the course correction today, you would probably have a story that you would be proud of. Many of us have got a story. So good seeing you, Glenn. And have stories to tell. And some of them we would like to just rip out of our life and say that has never happened. But here's the key, is that there are some parts of our story that we want to have accentuated, especially those that we've made some incredible decisions that we now are reaping the benefits of. The decisions you make yesterday, determine the story that you tell today. You can't change that story, but you can change the outcome of your future stories. This morning, I want to encourage you in the following way. That this morning's story deals with the fourth aspect, and that's being able to launch out into that which you're not familiar with. Something that is strange to you. Something that takes you out of your comfort zone. Takes you into an area of vulnerability where you really think, oh my word, I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to do that. I want to just tell you an example of a few things in my life, and please don't think that I love speaking about myself. I have a story to tell as well. I have a group of friends, and we've been friends since Standard 7, I think it's grade 9, I think it is. And we've been mates for all these years, and we've always kept in contact with each other. And we've had the most amazing friendship that now stretches over 45 years and over about 6 or 7 continents. And sometimes this good friend of mine, Eric, he actually contacted me this morning from New Zealand. He was out at sea. He's a ship's engineer. But what we had wonderful fun was to be able to write or to read. That was our thing. We would pass around books of philosophers we read, some political satire, and we would pass that to each other. And that was the kind of thing that we really enjoyed. We also enjoyed memorizing speeches by great orators, and so we would sit and talk and enjoy time together. And that's probably where my curiosity with God started. I remember there was a guy in my class, he was Muslim, and we often would speak about his faith, and it was never spoken about in a disrespectful way. But we would speak about it curiously, about what and who God is. I remember also being involved in Christianity. And at religious instruction period, RI, I'm not quite sure if we still have that at school. Do we still have RI periods? Religious instruction. No, is that gone? Okay. Right. Interesting. I used to do a little bit of a Devo, and we used to swap it between a few of us in the class. And those were good days. But then I also wondered when it came to about grade 11, what was I going to do with my life? And so the question came, well, that's easy. What is my interest? And so history, law, and politics was on the top of my list. A lot of the things that I've read, a lot of the things that I was curious about and wanted to discover some more, it was the kind of thing that I thought I would like to look at one day. And then I then spoke to an elder and I said to him, look, can I just have a chat with you about what I'd like to major in? The first bit of advice an elder ever told me was because at some time I felt, and I told it to you last week, that I was bullied. And I was bullied because I wasn't like other kids. I had a bit of a soft heart at that time. And then he said to me, if you run, you'll have to run forever. And so that's the first part I want to tell you today. If you're facing a tough situation this morning, if you run away from it, you'll have to run again, or always run. In other words, the idea of standing firm would be at the top of your priority. Then the second one that I was given as well was that I wanted to become an attorney and an advocate. That was my goal. But then I also spoke to an elder, and I said to him that I've been thinking about becoming a preacher as well because I enjoyed talking about God. And his advice to me was, don't become a preacher unless you have to. Don't become a preacher unless you feel compelled to do it. If you can do anything else, please do it. And I think it is at this cusp that I needed to make a decision. I made a decision to go to university to pursue legal studies. I got in and I was top of the class to be in that class. My parents turned down any signing of surety that I could get into that university. And I remember the day I cried and I still said, but God, you know that's where my heart lies. I had to go to a different university at the time, my second choice. And during those 1976 to 1980s, if you lived during that time, all hell broke loose in this country. It was very unstable to have a career or even to study. It was very difficult. And many times you would find that trains wouldn't run. It would take you from Bellville to Steenberg, where I lived, was about 3.5 hours one way. And so things were tough. Things were different those days. And so what little time you had to study was very tough. But you see, during my first semester, I'll never forget, I was sitting in a man's class called Jaap Durant, and he passed away recently. One of the finest theologians that I've ever met. And I remember that day that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I went to university and I sat through those classes and I became deeply disillusioned with the kind of power plays that I watched playing itself off in the areas that I was exposed to. And I walked away. After 10 years, my wife and I had a long discussion and I remember crying. And I said, there is this compelling feeling that I've got to go back and do what God had called me to do. My wife looked at me, so to say, we've just bought a new house. Victoria was very young, and it was hard. I said, baby, I can't live like this. I looked at promotions in the face, and nothing just appealed to me at that time. Everybody thought I'd lost the plot. The only person who believed in me was Susan. She stood by me through thick and thin. And together we stepped out in faith. And here again was the idea that through these difficult times, I then left that university, as I said to you, and then I went to retail. I worked for Checkers at the time, where I met my wife those years when we were still at school. Hey, Sue? And she proposed to me, by the way. But during the time when Victoria was very sick, Virginia's doctor, Dereck Beukes, called us. We went to see him, and he spoke to my daughter and diagnosed exactly what was wrong with her. And he also taught us the gospel. I then understood what God was busy doing. Let me ask you a question. What will your story sound like? What will it sound like? Is it a story that you would look at and say, sure, I should have done that, but I didn't? Or will you say, how can I live with myself not doing what God had called me to do? How can I do something or settle for that which is mediocre, which God had called me to do? It might be tougher, but it's worthwhile. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2, the answer is found in the text. And here Paul writes, and he said, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith. And here again, the question always is, not only which direction do I move into, but also who will start this direction for me and who will finish it for me. This series spoke about 4 decisions. The first one is, what discipline have you decided to start this year? Just one discipline that you want to start and you want to see it through. The second week we spoke about, what have you decided to stop? In other words, something that you know is crippling you and crippling your health. A relationship that you're in that is not ordained by God, that you are going into or you're persisting in. Maybe today, what is there that you need to stop doing? That you need to call and say, no more. Last week we spoke about, what do you decide to stay? In other words, when everything in you shouts, run, you then say, no ways, I'm not running anywhere. I'm going to do what God has placed me here to do. And then this morning we're going to be dealing with, in the 4th component, we're going to deal with fixing our eyes on Jesus. It's ironic when one talks about faith, the person that's always referred to by faith is Abram. Abram was a phenomenal man. I remember studying on Abram's life at university, and one of the key areas was that Ur of the Chaldees was called the Fertile Crescent. One of the most phenomenal areas, and it was highly populated, highly modernized. And there's also areas in that area which apparently they estimated that the population was about 250,000 people. I think it's more than Durbanville has. But it was also a modern area for astronomy, mathematics, commerce, and philosophy. And many people moved there to be part of the story of a developing world. We also find in Joshua chapter 24 and verse 2, which tells us that Abram's family worshipped those other gods, the gods of the Chaldeans. And that is referred to by Joshua in 24:15 of Joshua. But we find that the one true God then approaches Abram. And he says to him in Genesis 12 and verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, leave your land, your relatives, and your father's home, and go to the land which I will show you. You see, Abram is telling Abram, he says, I want you to leave everything that you know. Your comfort zone, your family, the very cusp and the very crucible of comfort that you are familiar with. And I want you to go to a place. By the way, I'm not going to tell you where it is. Leave and go. Now, when we look from history's side back, we can say, Abram, you could have trusted God all the way. God is faithful. But remember, the perspective you're looking from is known. But when you look from Abram's perspective, all that he had to face was uncertainty. Firstly, it was an unknown God telling him to go to an unknown place, leaving that which he knew. Leave what you know. And I want you to embrace that which is unpredictable, that which is difficult, that is unfamiliar. A preacher made a comment many years ago and said, to step forward toward your destiny, you might have to step away from your security. And that is exactly what Abram needed to do. You see, go to this place that you've never been. And then I would imagine Abram would have sat down a little bit and switched off the television and said, you know what, I need to think this through. Hang on, God, I grew up here. I know everybody here. I know the guy down the shop at Checkers. I know everybody in the stores. I know the hardware store. I even had my kids here. My kids have got friends here. Are you out of your cotton-picking mind? I'm not going. Oh, by the way, Abram didn't have children. But the picture I want you to see is that God's calling was to something that he was unfamiliar with. And so often, that is exactly what God does. He calls you into that which you have not mastered. He calls you into that which is a completely and utterly different walk with him. The fundamentals of that goes back to the Garden of Eden, where mankind sinned against God, where the fundamental foundation and relationship between God and man was fractured, and that was trusting God wholeheartedly for the outcome. God made him this promise. Genesis chapter 2 and 3, Abraham, here's my promise to you. I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the people of the earth will be blessed through you. I would imagine that at that time, Abram probably said to God, he probably thought to himself, you have got to be kidding. But hang on a minute. You see, when we follow God, we move our center of trust from ourselves and that which is known to him who knows everything. We move from the comfort of our assets and our comfort zone, and even our bad habits becomes our comfort zone, to something that we don't know, something that God is completely in charge of and requires us to be surrendered to him. At 75 years old, they've been trying to have children for years, and he was childless. But here's what's important. The idea of him following God was very much similar to what you and I have, because when God makes a promise to you and I, we sometimes think, this is good. We're entering into a negotiation now, aren't we? Brethren, I want to speak to us about some of the promises that we make to God. I sat with a wonderful man, and he'd passed by now. He made some promises from this pulpit one day. And I went to see him, and I said, be very careful what you promise God, because God's going to require it of you. You see, sometimes we ask God, Lord, please give me a child. Please give me this baby, Father. My husband and I, we love each other, and we want to raise this beautiful child. Please give us this child. And if you give me this child, I will honor you with the rest of my life. Father, my child is very sick. And if you bring my child through this, Father, I will honor you for the rest of my life. Father, if you get what I'm saying? The picture is, I want you to remember those promises. Because that will come and ask the question, yes, I've answered your question, where's your child? I thank God that we have a Sunday school that's got problems of space and teachers. It's a good problem to have. And I hope that we will overcome that problem, and we will pick up momentum to the degree that parents start to take responsibility for what God has given them. You see, you've asked God for the child, and you owe him your life. You see, the Bible tells us that blessed is the man who keeps his vow to God, even if it injures him. You see, God expects us as parents to honor him with what he's given us. Lord, if you give me this wealth, I will definitely worship you for the rest of my life. And funnily enough, the very thing that he blesses us starts to come between us and God, and then worshiping God becomes something that is bothersome. Read Malachi, where what we give to God now becomes the oorskitsels, or rather just what we can just say, "There, God, take that." Careful, be very careful. You see, Abraham understood that God is speaking to him in a way that no one else has spoken to him, and that God's promises are true. And that is why in verse 4, we don't detect that there was any kind of remonstration or any kind of negotiation. And that's the exact nature of a covenant, because the very next word in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 4 says the following: so Abraham went as the Lord had told him. You see, what are you betting on? What are you hinging your faith on? You're hinging your faith and you're tagging your life onto a God that is able to carry you through this difficult time that you are going through. Making that commitment to God and saying, Lord, let's talk about this. You see, when God calls you to come, he says, come. Today we refer to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A long history and a litany of leaving the ungodly, leaving the gods of this world and embracing the true God. And maybe today you and I need to hear this message, that God can take you places that you've never dreamt you could go before. You've always just functioned on this absolute low-key, below par potential of let me just get by. And God is saying, that's nonsense. I've created you for far more. You see, God is calling each one of us. You know, maybe God's asking you a story to dig deep and have a look into your unique story that you're writing. And ask, Lord, what is there that you want from me specifically, that I can do those things that you want me to do? Maybe God doesn't want you to leave your family, or maybe he doesn't want to leave this country, maybe he just wants you to get out of your chair and to walk to your next door neighbor. When God calls, I want you to watch that every time God has called someone, he put a promise to it. In other words, he would say to them, don't you worry about all the uncertainties. Although God will say, I'm not giving you any guarantees about tomorrow, but the fact that I am with you is enough. And that for us should be sufficient. It's ironic that when Paul struggled in his faith and he would say to God 3 times, please let me go, the same answer was, hey, Paul, my grace is sufficient. You've got what you need. You see, maybe you're saying today, how can I navigate the uncertainties of the future? God says, I am there already. Maybe today you're asking the question, I want to be a man and a woman of God so that I can live a life that is honorable to you. And maybe there's some stuff in your job that you are doing that is dishonest, that worked within the secular field, but it doesn't work in the spiritual field. What story do you want to tell? Maybe today you are saying, finally, I got the story now. I've got to leave. And so you go home and you call your wife, make her a cup of coffee, give her a Mari biscuit and say, baby, you and I need to talk. You know what Dereck said this morning? He says, I need to duck. Goodbye. No. And that's not what I'm saying. You can't go. You can't adios burravos your wife. You've got to stay because that's a covenant. So nobody's going anywhere. Don't go to your job tomorrow, smack the boss around a little bit, tighten his tie, and then say, listen, but I'm leaving this place. No, don't resign. Please don't. Don't hurt yourself. But maybe today you're saying, you know what? I want to sit with my children and I want to read the Bible every night in a systematic way. I want to sit and talk with my wife, and Sue and I have a habit in the mornings. We both sit down and we read our Bibles together. Sue listens to hers, and then we talk about stuff that comes up as we think about God's Word. And maybe that's a good place for you to start. Maybe morning's not your thing, then try it at night just before you go sleep. Or maybe like Uncle Frank Bontes many years ago used to read through the book of Proverbs every single day. It was 31 chapters, 1 chapter a day. He starts with a prayer, ends with a prayer, as simple as that. And he often used to come and say to me, preacher man, have you read this? For me, that is wonderful. But start. Maybe today you say, I want to start helping young children at high school to change their life. And maybe you want to just sing at green pastures and bring joy to the hearts of those who are really struggling. Ian will always be a man that I love very much, him and Heather, and also Mariki and the girls and Ali and Coral, and they sing, and it's just wonderful to stand and listen as they sing. But you see, brethren, here's the key. Whatever God is calling you to, just to step out of your comfort zone, do that. You see, maybe today you're asking the question, can I take the responsibilities? Can I shoulder the job that it requires? Can I afford all that I need to do? You see, God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. God will work with you. And before you know it, you will not even recognize yourself where God has taken you from. But it will require faith of you. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says, without faith it's impossible to please God. For those who believe in God must believe that he exists and that he is the perfecter of those who trust him. Hebrews 11:8 says here about Abraham, he said, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went, not knowing where he was going. He did this by faith. Walking with God out of prison of sin is walking out of a place that you're familiar with. There's a thing called recidivism, and that is often with people that have been in prisons where they call institutionalized. They do not know how to function outside of that environment. And sometimes when they get their freedom, they don't know what to do with it. And so therefore God says to you today, he says, hey, I'm going to be with you. This road's going to be unfamiliar, but that's exactly the way it is, because I'm God and you are not. And so all the way through, God is going to stand with you, and he promises you in the gospel, he says, I will be with you till the end of this age. You will never, ever be alone again. These things also might come through your mind is, have I got enough faith? God says, just trust me. Trust me for the first step, and I promise you, 40 years later, you will not recognize where you were. And you will be grateful to God that he moved you 40 years ago. What is the story you're going to tell your children one day? I'm going to share something with you which is quite tough. This morning my son would have been 33 years old. And it is tough. It's hard. We miss him. But if you ask, one of the things that I'm so grateful for was the day when he came to Sue and I and said, Dad, I can't live like this. He was not even 9 years old. And he said, I want to follow Christ. And that day I baptized my son into Christ. And I watched this young boy walk closely to God. If you ask me this morning just how serious it is that you raise your children in the nurturing and admonition of God. The other day, 14 children lost their life in one foul swoop. Don't think that you are immune to that. Where will your child be? You see, if a child is below the age of accountability, that child's still a child. They go to be with God. But I can tell you now, if that child's lost, God will require their blood from your hand. You see, the prayers that you've given, asking God to give you the child, God remembers that. And God then says there's a responsibility on you to make sure that that child will be with me one day. David, at a time when his son had died, and you'll find that story in the Bible, David was so heartbroken when he knew that his son had died. Then he got up, he got dressed. First place he went to was to worship. And then he said, my son will not come back to me, but I will go to be with him. Here's the key. The day we laid my son to rest, that was the day I decided that I will follow you wherever you lead. No questions asked. You see, one day I want to see my son again. I want to see him. I can tell you now, if there's things in my life that will hinder that, and in yours, it's got to go. The price is too expensive. Can you imagine that eternal separation from God? I don't even want to know what that looks like. But what I do know what it looks like, according to what God has said, I will see him in his glorified state. This morning I woke up and I said, Lord, we live for that day to see him again. I want you as a parent, and I'm begging you today, do not miss a Sunday school for your child, or a youth class, or a young adults class. Don't miss it. It's too expensive. There are people out there baying for the blood of your child. Careful. It's a nightmare you don't want to live. If you're not a child of God today, come on, man. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? What can you lose? Oh, you lose everything. The sin is gone. That stupid decisions that you've made, God will tear it out of that page in the book of life. God will rewrite your story. He will author it through his Holy Spirit. He will redesign a path for you that you've never even thought of or imagined. That comes out of Ephesians. And God says, I'll work with you. And you might say, Lord, my life is broken. God says, give me that. Lord, this is all I've got. It's messed up by sin. God says, bring it. It's cool. I'll work with that. And so this morning, brethren, I encourage you, don't let these moments pass. It's too expensive. You know, you might be the greatest cyclist on this earth, greatest bodybuilder, the greatest cricketer on a Sunday when you need to be at worship. And I'm not knocking anybody, please. I'm saying God blessed you with those skills. But you know what? That will not mean a hill of beans at the end of the time when we stand before God. Choose your battles. Choose your choices and make wise choices. At this time, I'd like to offer the invitation to those who want to give their life to Christ, that we can together baptize them into Christ so that they can walk with God. Let's stand and sing our song of encouragement.